Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Real glad that you could join us again. Well, we've all heard you are what you eat. Well, joining us today is the best-selling author of You Are What Your Grandparents Ate, What You Need to Know About Nutrition, Experience, Epigenetics, and the Origins of Chronic Disease, Judith Finlayson, and she's joining us to talk about ways to slow down your epigenetic clock. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Judith Finlayson.
Thank you for having me.
Give our listeners a bit of your background professionally, and then let's talk about epigenetics.
Well, I'm actually a journalist, and I got interested in nutrition because cooking was always my hobby, and I ended up writing a cookbook that did very well, and that got me really interested in the whole subject of nutrition. And so over the years, I became more and more focused on what they describe as the functional value of food, that is, its health benefits. And someone gave me a book that introduced me to the work of Dr. David Barker, who was an epidemiologist who got the whole area of research known as the developmental origins of health and disease going in the 1970s, and as they say, the rest is history.
So needless to say, you've been extremely interested in how food affects us, not just in taste, but in overall survival, as far as cells and everything else, yeah? Absolutely.
But what has changed, when I first started looking at nutrition as a scientific subject, really the studies were based on what I can describe as epidemiological research. So they could see, the effect of brassica cruciferous vegetables on cancer was one of the early areas. And those studies were associative. That is, if you ate more broccoli, they could see that it improved rates of cancer, or you weren't as likely to develop certain types of cancer, and so on and so forth. What changed more or less around the year 2000, there were a couple of things. At that point, they had finished mapping the human genome, and scientists had really thought that this was going to hold all the answers for disease development. Turned out it didn't. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the science of epigenetics, which had been bubbling away throughout the 20th century, kind of came to the fore because there were a couple of studies that really showed that you could supplement with, say, nutrients and improve epigenetic processes in ways that were passed on intergenerationally. And so that really, the kind of very important study in that area was the agouti mouse study. And so people then became very interested in the whole idea of epigenetics. And I should maybe tell you, for some of your listeners won't know what that is, because it's still kind of, it's not exactly mainstream, although it's moving there.
What is an example of an epigenetic process, and how does the food affect that process?
Well, let me first of all, let me tell you that your genes are fixed. So your genes are not going to change. But what does change, your genes operate in a very dynamic environment. Their expression changes. And their expression changes depending on environmental impacts. Things like nutrition is a key one. So I mentioned the agouti mouse study. The agouti mouse study, these mice who had been very sickly for generations, they were bred to be beautiful, and in being beautiful, they they didn't know it at the time, but they were undermining certain epigenetic processes. They fed the mice certain nutrients, pregnant female mice. Their offspring were born healthy, and then their offspring's offspring were also born healthy without further supplementation. That occurred because they were able to positively influence an epigenetic process known as methylation. Methylation is the epigenetic process that's been most studied, and methylation is now kind of entering the mainstream in terms of subjects that people are discussing and are worrying about. You mentioned slowing down the process of aging. There's a scientific group that has set up something called the epigenetic clock. They base that on the knowledge that methylation, which is one of these epigenetic processes that is constantly ongoing in your body, declines as you age. So they can look at cells and they can see differences between your chronological age and your epigenetic age by measuring the patterns of methylation. So as I said, things like nutrients, we know from the agouti mouse study, which was one of these early studies that really started thrusting epigenetics into the mainstream, that through good nutrition, you can begin to influence epigenetic processes. And there are now, thousands of studies showing the impact of all kinds of lifestyle changes. Nutrition is the big one, but we're also seeing things like exercise, and even now moving into the area of things like mindfulness, meditation, and so on.
What would you say would be an ideal meal, a meal plan to guarantee that you're getting the proper nutrition in the proper quantities for your particular lifestyle change?
Well, it's interesting. This is cutting-edge science, but the basic message that evolves from it is very, very simple. It's not rocket science. So it's basically a varied diet of whole foods. Get rid of the processed foods. Numerous studies show that processed foods really negatively affect gene expression in various ways. And just eat a healthy diet, get regular exercise. It's good old standard stuff. They're finding things like in Japan, they're very interested in this whole idea of forest bathing. Going out and walking in nature positively affects gene expression. So it's just a whole package of healthy lifestyle adaptations. Now, there is a whole new area of research that's emerging called epigenetics, where they can go in and analyze some of your epigenetic patterns and find out what's not working properly. And the theory is to target them with specific nutrients. That's what they did with the agouti mice. They targeted them with nutrients that were known to improve methylation. But this epigenetics is still a very, very murky area, and it's really just trickling down in little ways. Things like turmeric, which is, having a moment as a health food, and a nutraceutical, you can see that it activates or improves the activity of one pathway, one epigenetic pathway, the nerve pathways, which is one that they're looking at closely now. But that science is still, it's not there yet. And really, the best strategy, and lots of evidence suggests that a good balanced diet is really the way to go. They have studied the Mediterranean diet is probably the most studied diet in this regard, and it does positively affect gene expression. They've studied, extra virgin olive oil and found that it does the same thing. So, these things, they all work together. But it's basically, good whole foods, adequate amounts of exercise, and trying to keep stress under control.
Let's talk about how this COVID-19 pandemic has affected the way that people, I guess, intend to take a look at some of their eating habits. And then I'd like to find out where we can get a copy of your book, You Are What Your Grandparents Ate, What You Need to Know About Nutrition, Experience, Epigenetics, and the Origins of Chronic Disease.
Well, what we're really, people have become, more interested in food and more interested in cooking at home, for sure, because they can't go out. But what we have seen is that links with good eating habits and better immunity, so things like vitamin D, and which they have shown, zinc is one that does improve immunity. So people have become more focused on the whole idea of functional foods and of eating well during COVID, and hopefully these patterns will continue as we move out of it, and have developed more of a habit of eating at home and cooking at home, which has also been shown to be linked with healthier eating.
Now, where can our listeners get a copy of your book, You Are What Your Grandparents Ate, and also a little bit more information about you as well?
Well, my book is available certainly through Amazon.com, at Barnes & Nobles, at, major book outlets. If you want more information on me, I do have a website, JudithFinlayson.com. And there are links with a few articles that I've written and so on as well.
Well, I thank you for joining us here on the program. It's been a pleasure, and I'm hoping that we speak again soon.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download it, SoundCloud, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.